Now, as the name of the video implies, this is part 9 of a story, so if you haven't seen the first several parts yet, I'd highly recommend starting at part 1, and if you like it, working your way back here. I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below. And now, without any further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves witnessing a hazy, dreamlike vision of a lush green island, and on that island we see Dooku and a slightly older Anakin facing off against 3 dark-robed figures all wielding red lightsabers. And as we focus in on one of those figures, we see the burnt and scarred face of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that's when we can just make out the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn saying, "Obi-Wan, hear me. It's not too late to turn from this path." That's when there is a flash, and we suddenly find Obi-Wan Kenobi standing alone in the dimly lit office of Chancellor Palpatine. We then watch him wince as if he's been physically struck by something, though we don't see anything, and he stumbles forward and catches himself on the Chancellor's desk. And for a long moment, he stands there with his eyes shut tight, as if fighting back some great unseen pain. And he doesn't open his eyes until, hovering above the desk, a blue holographic image of Palpatine appears, standing before the entire Senate. And that's when we are then taken into the massive Senate chamber and focused in on an anxious-looking Palpatine, with Massa Meta standing at his side, and after taking a long, deep breath, Chancellor Palpatine begins. "Members of the Senate, citizens of the Republic, it is at this late hour that I come to you with the most troubling of news. The Jedi, who have served our great Republic for generations, have lost their way." We then quickly get a shot of a small shuttle flying through hyperspace, and inside the cockpit then, we see Dooku watching a small blue image of Palpatine making his speech. While sitting next to him, Anakin stares off vacantly, lost in his own grief. Dooku gives a sympathetic look to Anakin before focusing back on the hologram with a grim look on his face, before we're taken back to the Senate building, where Palpatine continues. "It has recently come to light that the Jedi have commissioned the creation of a clone army that would be used to attack and overthrow the Republic at a time when we find ourselves divided, as more and more systems threaten to create a separatist alliance and leave our great Republic." We then are quickly taken into the Jedi Temple and see Mace Windu running through the halls before he comes to a door that slides open and reveals a meditating Yoda within. Immediately Windu says, "The dark side surrounds the Chancellor. I feel it now. It's all I can feel. Tell me you didn't know." Yoda says nothing and remains in deep meditation. Windu, his face darkening with anger, then says, "Tell me you didn't know." Finally, Yoda opens his eyes and shakes his head ever so slightly. "Know this? I did not." Windu then says, "We have to stop him, now, before it's too late." Yoda sighs and lowers his head as he says, "Hidden within the shroud of the dark side, Palpatine was, but now, casted upon us, he has. Powerful Palpatine clearly is. The time to confront him, it is not. Calm your mind, overcome your fear, feel the force around you, and realize defeat him now. We cannot." Windu's expression darkens even further. "You speak to me as if I'm a youngling." Yoda says nothing to that, and only lowers his head and shuts his eyes. Windu goes on, "So you're going to sit here and do nothing? I'm not so certain I'm the one overcome by fear." We then watch as Windu turns and hurries away, before we're taken back into the Senate building, where Palpatine continues his speech. "So now I make a call for unity, for the Republic to stand together as one against the treacherous Jedi, and in order to maintain the peace and security within the galaxy, I have brokered a deal with Mandalore to not only increase future stability within the galaxy, but to deal with the menace of the Jedi now." We are then again taken to a ship flying through hyperspace, but this time it is a small, sleek, black arrow-shaped craft. And once inside the ship's cockpit, we see Plagueis watching the speech, and hear the Chancellor further elaborate on his new alliance with the Mandalorians. And as he continues to speak of it, we see Plagueis' hands ball into fists, and his face gets angrier and angrier, before we're then taken back into the Senate building and pick up with Palpatine's speech. "Furthermore, I have used my executive power to order a preemptive strike against the Jedi Temple here on Coruscant that will be commencing now. So I urge any and all citizens who may be anywhere in the vicinity of the temple to quickly and orderly evacuate the area, and rest assured, The threat will be dealt with promptly and efficiently, and your continued well-being and the well-being of the Republic itself is my continued top priority and concern." The Senate then erupts into a rousing ovation for Palpatine as he concludes his speech, before we switch scenes and get a shot of the outside of the Jedi Temple, and for a long moment, all is calm, before the calm is rocked by multiple impact explosions, and we then see at least 24 Mandalorian ships descending towards the temple. We're then inside one of those ships, and in a hangar bay where we see perhaps 50-some Mandalorian warriors checking their armor, weapons, and jetpacks, before we see Rigamati standing calmly amongst them with his arms folded across his chest, talking to a life-sized blue holographic image of Pre Vizsla. We then hear Rigamati say, "Thank you for this honor. At long last, Mandalore will have its vengeance upon the Jedi, and with this victory, you shall take your place as rightful ruler of our people." We then see Pre Vizsla, who is not wearing his helmet, give a small grin before saying, "Focus on the task at hand, Rigamati. Our new employer has assured me that he has done something that will have disoriented the Jedi and give us the edge in battle. But they are still Jedi, and not to be taken lightly." Rigamati snorts and says, "The Jedi won't know what hit them. Victory is already within our grasp." Vizsla quickly fires back. "Is that what you thought when you faced but a few Jedi earlier and got 3 of my men killed before fleeing like a coward?" We see Rigamati's head lower a bit, and he remains silent as Vizsla goes on. "Follow the plan and do not fail, or the Jedi will be the least of your concerns." Rigamati nods, and the image of Vizsla flickers away. He then turns to his men and gives one single nod of the head, and moments later, the hangar bay door slowly begins to open, and the Mandalorians fire up their jetpacks and fly out of the ship, and we then follow them as they descend towards the Jedi Temple that is still being rocked by explosions. We also see that all the other Mandalorian ships have also opened their hangar bay doors, and that a massive swarm of armored Mandalorian warriors now makes its way towards the temple. We're then back inside the temple and following Mace Windu as he marches through the corridors, while all around him we hear explosions, see flames and falling debris, and watch Jedi running around in a state of utter panic and confusion. That's when we hear someone calling out for help, and soon see Luminara Unduli trying to use the Force to lift a massive pillar that has fallen upon a fellow Jedi. "Master Windu," she calls out when she spots him. "Quickly, he's still alive. Together I believe we could lift it and—" But she stops when Windu walks right by her without so much as giving her a glance. Soon after, as Windu enters one of the temple's hangar bays, a Mandalorian lands right in front of him and quickly raises a rifle and points it at him, but before he can fire, Windu makes a swiping motion with his hand, and the weapon goes flying right from his grip. Windu, as he marches right past him, then uses the same hand to form a fist, and we see and hear the chest armor the Mandalorian wears start to collapse in on itself. That is then followed by the sound of popping and cracking, as his ribs and spine are shattered. Yet again Windu makes a swiping motion with his hand, and the warrior's body goes skidding across the floor like a rag doll, and we then watch as Windu gets into a speeder and takes off. We're then back with Luminara, and focused in on her face as she gives everything she's got to lift the pillar off of her fellow Jedi. And then, over her shoulder, and unknown to her, we see Rigamati walking up behind her, and we watch as he puts a blaster to the back of her head. We then hear the blaster fire and immediately shift scenes, and we are now with Yoda who, despite the chaos all around him, is still deep in meditation. But now his eyes shoot open, and in those eyes a soft blue glow is being reflected, and a moment later we see the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn standing before him. Yoda then declares, "Fall for the tricks of the dark side, I will not." To that, Qui-Gon gives a bit of a grin and says, "Well, good thing this is no trick of the dark side then, my old friend." Yoda shuts his eyes tight and concentrates for a long moment before saying, "Really is you, I feel. Though something more too, it seems." Qui-Gon nods and says, "I have become a true servant of the Force now, and must protect it from the dark side that grows from within and threatens to consume it." Yoda again nods. "Feel it, I have, the growing power and corruption of the dark side. Always known this day would come, I have." Qui-Gon then says, "I understand now that you have known your whole life that you would live to see the Jedi Order be destroyed, that you had to allow it to become weak, so that the dark side would reveal itself to then be destroyed by the Chosen One." Yoda lowers his head and sighs, and Qui-Gon goes on. But there is hope for the future of the Jedi Order, and that hope is alive in your old Padawan. Yoda lifts his head. Dooku, avoid the dark path he has. Qui-Gon nods and smiles. He has been saved, in large part thanks to your training, and a future for the Jedi Order has been assured under his guidance. And now you need to be trained so that you can join me in my fight against the darkness within the Force itself. It is then that we hear the sounds of blaster fire coming from just outside the chamber they're in. Qui-Gon turns, looks at the door and says, Make your way to Dagobah, my old friend, where I shall teach you how to purge the dark side and retain your consciousness after death. The door then slides open and 2 Mandalorian warriors enter, and Qui-Gon says as he begins to fade away, I cannot help you with this, but know that you are free to do what you must to defend the temple and save as many Jedi as you can. There is still hope for them. The Mandalorians, who apparently didn't see Qui-Gon's Force ghost, watch as Yoda reaches for his cane and slowly and gingerly starts to slide himself off the elevated seat he was on. They then look at each other and shrug as Yoda slowly starts to shuffle his way towards them. One comments, so much for all of them being great warriors. The other one laughs and the 2 point their weapons at him casually, and that's when Yoda gives one wave of the hand and both warriors simply fall to the ground. We then switch scenes and are taken outside of the burning temple and watch as a large Mandalorian ship descends towards it. We're then in that ship and with Pre Vizsla, who is talking to a hologram of Rigamani and asking him for a report. We see Rigamani then shrug as he says, This is almost too easy. Whatever was done to these Jedi has them completely disoriented, and he then stops and looks at something as we hear the sounds of blaster fire and screams, mixed in with the sounds of a swinging lightsaber. A moment later, we see Rigamani frantically reaching for his holstered blaster, but it is too late, and we just see a green blur before Rigamani's head falls from his shoulders and the transmission ends. We then see Vizsla give an almost careless frown as he hits a button on his wrist and another blue image appears, and this time it is Plagueis, who immediately says, You would dare betray me! Vizsla chuckles and flashes a cocky grin. My loyalty is to my people and to Mandalore, not to you or anyone else. The image of Plagueis then begins to quiver with anger as he says, I will not rest until Mandalore burns, and the ashes of your people are scattered to the corners of this galaxy. And when you take your last breath, Mandalorian, it shall be my face you see. The transmission then ends, and before the scene ends, we see an ever so slightly worried look on the face of Pre Vizsla. We're then taken inside the Senate building and into Palpatine's office, where Obi-Wan still stands at the desk, but he is now looking through the files of a datapad, and on the small screen we can see images of clone troopers and ships. That's when we hear Palpatine say, who has quietly entered the office, Hard to believe the Jedi Order could be so corrupt, isn't it? Obi-Wan gives a smug grin. Very hard to believe indeed. Your evidence is interesting though, but I don't believe any of it. Nevertheless, it is all true, and even if it wasn't, the Senate and the people believe it. Obi-Wan frowns and tosses the datapad down on the desk. And now what? Are you finally going to kill me? Palpatine grins. As I already told you, you still have much use to me, my apprentice. For once the Mandalorians have done away with the Jedi Order, they will become a great threat once more, and one that will need to be controlled. Obi-Wan then says, Your old master thought you were going to start a war with Mandalore, and that you would somehow be able to make me their leader so that you can control both sides of the conflict. Palpatine again smiles. As I expected his plan would be. So very predictable he is. As are you and your desires to truly bring peace to the people of your fallen beloved wife. But know this, my apprentice. Peace can only be achieved through absolute strength. I will teach you and give you that strength, and then you can bring peace to Mandalore and rule it as you please, while the rest of the galaxy will be mine. To that, Obi-Wan nods and falls to a knee, but at that very moment, the door to the office slides open, and in walks Mace Windu, and his eyes go back and forth a time or two between Obi-Wan and Palpatine, before with a look of immense anger on his face, he ignites his purple saber. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.